So I like to do lots of things. I don't know if you've noticed. Anyone who's watched my videos would know that I'm pretty scattered. I like to do lots of different things. And one of those things is cooking and baking. And I particularly I'm into sourdough right now. I made my own starter and I'm making sourdough bread. So I have a way to bake a delicious sourdough loaf consistently and reliably without paying too much attention to the details, just by feel and very simple recipe to guidelines to follow. So I'm going to show you how I do it now.
So my recipe calls for half a cup of starter. So in this instance, I kind of play with the starter. So I'm going to take almost a cup, like maybe 3/4 of a cup here. I just took a big healthy scoop and then a little extra. So I'm just doing it by feel. It's 1 1/4 cups of water for this recipe. So I just use a big cup and pour it in and sort of estimate the 1/4 cup. So it could be anywhere between a quarter and a half. Then you just mix it all together really well and slurry it up. So now it's 3 cups of flour, and this is going to make a pretty wet feeling dough, and you'll be tempted to put more flour in, but don't. 3 cups is more than enough, and by the time it hydrates and everything else, it'll be a pretty good consistency dough. Then it's a teaspoon and a half of salt. So I just once again just estimate that, throw it in. I'm not being too careful, as you can see. I was careful with the flour. Then you just mix it all together with your hands. Cover it up with plastic wrap and let it sit for 20 minutes. You want to mix it so that all the flour is moist in some way. So no dry flour in the bowl. And that's good enough. It'll be lumpy and gross. So I got a couple of extra ones started already. So this I've done sort of different ratios. I haven't been careful with my flour and water and salt mixtures. So this one here is really wet. And it's the first one I'm going to do the first folding. And the way I do it is I just hold it in my hand because I find that this dough, I don't know, maybe it's because I don't have a granite countertop, but it sticks and makes a hell of a mess on my counter. So I just do it in my hand. I fold it like this. Okay, this one's really wet. You see that water beside me? Um, I'm hydrating the dough with my hand, so I take little handfuls of water and mix it in as I'm folding it. It makes it harder to stick together, but on the first sort of few folds, you can really add a lot more water to it that way, and it gets puffier every time. So then I just leave my plastic wrap that I covered the bread with on the counter and put it on there so it doesn't stick to my counter. Get my bowl clean, nice and clean again. And then, as you can see, I'm keeping adding some water by wetting my hands. I'll form it into a rough ball and let it sit until we have our second folding episode. So that goes in the bowl, and I let it sit for an hour, and then we go for the second fold. So then I just repeat the process with these other two. These ones, you can see this one's a lot thicker. It didn't have as much water. I stuck much closer to the original recipe with that one. So you can see I'm just kind of by feel messing around with how much water I put on my hands and how much water I threw in when I estimated 1 1/4 cups and stuff like that. So this one's turned out a little thicker, a little drier. And then this one here, it's like halfway in between the two. It's it's quite wet, but it's easier to manipulate than the first one. The first one's really wet. I'm going to try to make the first one super high hydration if I can. And I know this isn't the right way to do sourdough. There's all kinds of rules that I'm breaking here. But you know what? The bread turns out great. So it's not a scientific thing here. This is a way to get bread made. Good bread made quickly by feel. So just put this one away, and they sit for 1 hour, and then you carry on to the second fold. And this is the second fold here, and this is the really wet one. And I keep adding water to my hands in significant amount, like a little handful, and then mix it in as I go. You can see how much wetter it is. It gets much wetter as you do the integration of the water with your hands, and the folding and the gluten develops, gets really stretchy. So now we'll just fast forward through the rest of it because it's all the same kind of thing. And rest assured, they are all getting stretchier as I go. All right, this is the third fold. Now I'm going to do, this is the wet one. So I'm still adding water to this as I go, even on the third fold, and it's getting really wet and really stretchy and hard to stick together when it's wet. It's getting hard to fold, but I get it done. Here's the second one. That was the dry one, and this is the sort of medium one. So I'm getting this one folded now. So we're at the fourth fold. This is the wet one we're starting with, as usual. And it's wet now. Look how wet and slimy. It's like putty. It's going to be really hard to form into a boule. Now I'm going to do the window pane test, which is you take your thumbs and fingers and you stretch a membrane out of the dough. And if it holds that thin membrane, if you can get a very thin membrane, then it's ready. The gluten's developed enough and it's good to put it to the next stage. Next stage is bulk rise. So I'm going to put it in a warm place, which is my kitchen cupboard. I have a really warm little spot for 1 to 4 hours to let it rise or double or at least 1/3 in size. So grow a little bit. Get some air in it. There's my cupboard with my starter. So here's 4 hours later. So I'll bring them all over here to show you how much they've increased in size, and it's pretty significant. Yeah, I think they've doubled anyway, which is great. So they'll be nice and airy. So we'll get ready now. I'll do a boule first, and then I'm going to do 2 square pans. So just have it's like an old dress shirt, Ralph Lauren to be precise. It's a button-up shirt that I use to put inside a bowl. It's just very simple. This stuff is sticky. This is the wet one, and I'm not having a good time with it. It's sticking all over my counter. But I'm forming it roughly into a boule. This is not a pro way to do it, but I'm getting it done. You know what? In the end, it's a little round boule. So that cloth has to be really heavily floured, and so the boule too when it's wet. They use rice flour. Most of the professionals or the proper bread makers use rice flour, so it doesn't keep incorporating it into the dough as it's sitting there, because this flour, some of it will get absorbed into the dough. But I have only flour, regular wheat flour, so that's what I cook with. That's what I bake the bread with. I don't bother with that kind of stuff. So just making sure to get the sides floured and get that cloth really heavily floured, because if it sticks to it, which it probably will anyway, it's just such a pain to get the cloth off and not damage the boule after all that work. So now it's going in the fridge overnight, and it'll be ready to bake in the morning. So I'm going to do it with the other 2. And these ones I'm putting them in a bread loaf pan, because I don't really like the round boules that much. They're hard to slice and you get really inconsistent slices. So if I put it in a bread loaf, I have to stretch it out a little bit more rectangular to get it to fit in that pan. But when I do, you can see how dry. That's the dry one. That was the dry one. And it's really a lot easier to work with. But once I get it in that pan and it fills it in by rising, it makes a really nice loaf when it springs up in the oven. So that's what we're doing. So we're just going to do the same for all of them. I had 2 bread loaf pans and just 1 round boule. And I used the super wet one in the round boule to see what I could get for crumb afterwards. So the third one, this is the medium, sort of in between moisture content one. Dump it into the banneton, load it up with flour, and make sure it's not going to stick. You want to really be liberal with that. And then it gets bagged up with the rest and put in the fridge till morning. Here's morning. Ready to bake. Preheated to 500 degrees with a baking stone inside. And I like to use a pizza tray, like a cookie sheet, upside down with a piece of parchment. And then I dump out the bread. Now, sorry, I switched the sequence. This isn't the wet one. This is one of the loaves. This is the dry one, I believe. Anyway, get that out there. That's straight out of the fridge. The oven's preheated to 500. The pizza stone's inside there, preheated to 500 as well. So you can see the nice and cold dough is holding its shape really well. And I'm just going to give it a scoring. You have to always score sourdough, as we know. So I'm just going to do vertical lines, nice deep ones with a razor, straight razor blade. And that's, like I say, straight out of the fridge, cold. It holds its form better. Dump it out, score it just before putting it in the oven. And then it goes in the oven, and I cover it with a big stainless steel bowl. I'm pretty low tech, no Dutch oven here. Gets covered like that, and 20 minutes covered at 500 degrees. Set a timer, and then when that's up, we uncover it. We'll reduce the heat to 450 and bake it for another 20 to 30. Here we go. Now we're ready to uncover the first loaf, and you see how it sprung up in the oven. How cool is that? So that really sprung up nicely. And now I'll reduce the heat, sorry about the shaky camera, to 450. Because I've found that if you leave it at 500, it makes the crust way too crunchy. And I'll put it at 30 minutes. But also in my experiences, I always pull it out before the full 30 minutes is up. So here, pow, it's cooked. I'm looking at it to make sure it's at least 180 or a little bit over 180 degrees. Then I know that it's fully cooked. And the sound of it, of course, when you tap on it as well.
Place that over there.
So here's the boule. This is the super wet one, and I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to take it out quickly. This is all in a little bit double time, I think, just to make it a little quicker, because I labored over this. Trying to get the cloth off was hard, and you see how it's not holding its form. It's right out of the fridge, cold, but it was so wet that it's really slopping out over that tray. The parchment paper is key, by the way. Always use parchment paper. It keeps the bread from sticking or doing anything weird. And I like to put that tray right on the baking stone. And I have the tray upside down, the pizza tray, so that there's a little bit of airspace between the stone and the pizza tray. I'm just doing a square on top of this one and get it in the oven as quickly as I can. Here's it exposed 20 minutes later, and it's sprung quite a bit, but it's still a little flatter than I would have liked. Now we have 8:23 left on the timer. That's out of 30 minutes for the uncovered setting. So it was only in for just over 20 minutes, but it's done. And I'll go, I tap on it and do all that stuff and take its temperature. And it is definitely warm enough, hot enough. But it didn't spring up as much as I would have liked. This is the really wet one, though. So, and it has, I mean, it's all right. Not as impressive as the first one. But it was my first time doing really, really wet dough too. This is the medium texture or consistency or hydration level one. Although there's no science or no careful science done with this one. Anyway, I'm gonna try to decorate this one a little more aesthetically, or I'll just take a little more care with this one. Cover it up. Give it 20 minutes covered, uncover it after 20. Setting the timer. I always go over. All right, here it is, time to uncover. There's what it looks like. Did it ever spring up nicely? And we'll let it brown up in the oven. Reduce the heat to 450. For this one was just over 20 minutes as well. Take that one out and have a look at it. And here they are, all three of them together. And this is so it's medium at the front, medium consistency, the wet one in the middle, and then the driest one at the back. So I'll give the fanciest one away to my neighbor. He'll send me a picture of what it looks like, and the other two I'll keep. Here's the really wet one. wanted to check it out right away. And it looks nice. It's nice, stretchy, and really full, nice open crumb.
This is my starter, and it's been fed recently, so now it's fresh and active. This is just to show you what mine looks like. I grew it myself.
So there you go. They were all delicious, by the way, reports and personal opinion, and they're all beautiful loaves. Different, sort of not being careful about those ratios, just making sure the ingredients are there and it feels right. So easy bread by feel.